another episode of A Whole Lot of Grey. I'm Anish, and today I'm joined by Mr. Sharad Sharma, the co founder of iSpirit, which I guess is, I'll let him get into the meat of it, but is best described as a think tank for software products, if that's fair assessment of it. But thank you, Mr. Sharad, for joining us today.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah, so I guess before we dive into, I guess the deeper parts of this interview, just kind of walk myself and my listeners through what is iSpirit, the kind of work you guys do, and maybe like what is your motivation and inspiration to start this think tank.
So, iSpirit is a non-profit technology think tank, and it's India focused, and its goal is to make India a product nation. And we'll unpack what that means as
Yeah.
we go along. But the mechanism of making that happen is to supplement state capacity and market capacity. And on the state side, we build this or help build this digital public infrastructure, some of which people know of as India Stack, Health Stack, etc., as well as influence policy
Right.
that is needed for innovation to happen. On the market side, we help market players with playbooks as well as market catalysts.
Right.
These could be to do with motivating money to be invested in the area, or it could be market collectives that come together to do things that they may not have been able to do. So, for example, Sahamati is a market collective in the account aggregator space
Right.
that was incubated by
It connects
iSpirit.
lenders and buyers and
It
stuff, right?
connects,
Yeah.
it underpins the data infrastructure that we have.
Right.
So, so uh, we are, we would say probably halfway through our journey.
Yeah.
We have a long way to go,
Yeah.
and many of us have been kind of there as volunteers. So what sets us apart is that this is a volunteer-based think
Right.
tank, and we call ourselves No Greed, No Glory volunteers. And why do we do that? Because by not having any greed, we let the market actually make money, because we think India's hard problems are going to be solved only in a market based ecosystem using entrepreneurs. And if they're solving a problem, they should be able to make money
Yeah.
solving that problem. And no glory means that we don't step in front of the policymakers who have to stick their neck out to do something different. It's very
Right.
hard to do that here in India. And so we don't take credit away from a success that they may have helped bring to life.
Right.
So that is how it is. And we are relatively small because to implement no greed, no glory, you need a social compact. Social compact works only up till the Dunbar's limit, which
Yeah.
is, nobody knows what the exact number is, but it's about 150 is what people speculated to be. We are currently about 186 volunteers. So we are
Wow.
roughly about that number at any point in time. And so that's really what I
What do you
spirit
guys
about. So
do?
it's an example of a volunteers coming together.
Yeah.
And just to finish, some people call us IETF of the East. IETF stands for Internet Engineering Task Force. At some
Nice.
point, we can
We'll go over
talk
that.
about
Yeah.
why that's the foundational piece of what internet is. And others also call us the Lunar Society of India.
Wow.
And Lunar Society goes back to the 18th century in UK, and included the grandfather of Charles Darwin, James Watt, Priestley, many others who laid the foundation for the scientific revolution that happened in Europe uh, as a set of volunteers. So but actually these are only partial explanations of what iSpirit is.
No, no. I think that's a
Yeah.
great intro for our listeners. I want to touch on something, and like you said, we'll unpack a lot of the terminology as we go along. But something as basic as digital public infrastructure, how would you describe it to a layperson?
Yeah. So, a easy way to think of it is to compare it with physical infrastructure. So, when we think of transportation infrastructure, for example, airport, railways, roads, this is usually public infrastructure. Although, many of our airports are privately provisioned public infrastructure, right? So, if you go to Delhi, Mumbai, or Bangalore, these are private airports, but they operate under a charter, under a license from the government. If you go to Pune and Chennai, they are publicly provisioned public infrastructure. So first is there is this notion of infrastructure, physical infrastructure. Why is that important? Because it lets people innovate on top of that. Electricity is very often regarded as infrastructure, privately provisioned infrastructure. And Then you can also think of telecom infrastructure, right? Our mobile operators are part of a licensing regime which ensures that this is public infrastructure. Now, what's the difference between public infrastructure and private infrastructure, right? So, what's an example of a private infrastructure? In our digital world, for example, all the cloud computing players are private infrastructure, AWS, Microsoft Azure, even for that matter, you could say that the Play stores
Yeah.
are private
Private, yeah.
infrastructure. So infrastructure is important, but what's the difference between the two? The difference is that if people innovate on top of the private infrastructure has the right to quote unquote tax it,
Right.
right? So if I make lots of money on the Apple store, I am obliged to give them 30% tax, right?
Right.
Same is the case with cloud infrastructure. They can choose to tax it if they
Right.
so like. The notion of a public infrastructure is that that's not possible,
Yeah.
right? And
Because it's in public interest,
because it's
essentially.
in public interest.
Yeah.
And therefore, if you're an innovator on top of the public infrastructure, then you don't have to worry that if I become super successful, this will in some way take away some of the value that I create. So that's the difference. Now coming back to digital infrastructure. So what became clear to us sometime in 2013, 2014, that India was going through a revolution at that time, which was to do with SaaS, software
As
as
a
a
service,
service
yeah.
players. We know of you know companies like Zoho, Freshworks, Fusion Charts, many others, and they were all coming up and starting to do well, and they were all based on this cloud infrastructure. And we realized that as much money as our SaaS players will make, the same amount of money, these digital infrastructure people will make.
Yeah.
And so we asked ourselves a question: if our future digital infrastructure is all foreign,
Right.
how is this a good thing?
For
We'll
us,
become a
yeah.
digital colony.
Exactly.
And so a conversation started at that time and saying what part of that digital infrastructure should actually be Indian.
Right.
And the way to frame that problem for us was the digital infrastructure that allows innovation to happen for Bharat.
Right.
That we should worry about.
Absolutely.
Because first, the West has no motivation to create it. They
Yeah.
don't even know what it is.
Exactly.
Second is, we got to figure this out for ourselves.
For sure.
And if we figure it out for ourselves, we can actually build it ourselves.
Right.
So after much discussion, we had a very minimal definition of this kind of infrastructure. And that is that all digital infrastructure that mediates the flow of people, flow of money, and flow of information should be Indian in nature.
Right.
So that became the basis for India Stack.
Wow.
And that is a term that we have used till almost September of last year.
Yeah.
And in September of last year, India was at the threshold of taking leadership of G20. And it was also clear at that time that, many other countries wanted to replicate the India story. So calling it India Stack for everybody else
It's not a
just
good move, yeah.
it just didn't make sense.
Right.
So at that time, we kind of created this new term called digital public infrastructure.
Right. And so, kind of to add to that, is if you could maybe shed some light as to, you talk about a lot of other countries seeking to emulate what we've done with India Stack, right? Or what you guys have done with India Stack. Why is India Stack so revolutionary and unique?
Because what has happened is the way to think of it is it isn't so revolutionary actually as an idea. As an implementation, the fact that we were able to do it here in India is revolutionary. But the idea that hard problems are solved as a jugalbandi, as a partnership between private innovation and public good is not a new idea.
Right.
And that's an idea that's been around for a long time. Usually, that public good that you have is public research, right? So, for example, the mRNA vaccine that we talk about is a result of public research in mRNA and private innovation on the
Right.
vaccine side, right? You could say this is exactly what happens in many other areas, right? And internet itself is a result of public kind of technology, ARPANET, and subsequently internet, and then the innovation that has happened on top of it. So the idea is not new.
Yeah.
And what had happened is that it was clear that if we were going to solve the hard problems of Bharat, then we needed innovation to happen. And why not have that innovation take place in this form?
Of course, yeah.
The problem that we had was that public research cannot be done easily in a volunteer model.
Right.
But public technology can be done easily in a volunteer model,
yeah.
right?
True.
And because of open source and people willing to donate their time and effort, it is possible to make that
Yeah.
happen. So therefore, the India version of that model became that can we use public technology and private innovation to solve India's hard problems, especially as they relate to not the Bharat. And I should take a minute to describe what Bharat is. So Bharat is really India 2 and India 3. So India, what does that mean? India is a big country, right? 300 million people. So if you take India 1 as 100 million, the richest 100 million
Yeah.
families, in then India 2, the second 100 million families, and India 3 is the remaining 100 million families. The middle families are serviceable by the market.
Right.
But they need new business models to make it happen.
Right.
A very good example is Jio mostly serves India 2.
Right.
And it does very well as a business doing it. But they had to rethink their business completely to
Right.
be able to do that. India 3 is the poorest part of India.
Right.
And therefore that
One quick
relies...
interruption, my bad.
Yeah.
Just so I'm following correctly, the 300 million thing is an example, scaling it into like 3 tiers, right? It's not like
300
we
million
literally
is
have.
actually the number of families that we have.
Oh, 300 million households, you're saying?
Households.
Okay,
yeah,
not
yeah.
population count
It's
or
not
anything. Okay,
population.
cool. That's how I was
So
clear.
300 million
Continue, yeah.
families
Households,
is what
yeah.
we have. So India 3 is 100 million families.
Right.
They don't generate enough disposable income to participate in the market.
Right.
So they are dependent on government services
Right.
instead of private services. So the thinking for us was, how can we make sure there is innovation that happens in
Right.
that category as well? So what would be the set of building blocks, which are publicly available building blocks, that would unlock this innovation, right? And so this thinking, as I said, the core concept is not new, but its implementation in this form in India is new. And also the fact that we thought of doing it as public infrastructure rather than private infrastructure, doing it by making it privately provisioned, by looking at it as a combination of what the state is doing, what the volunteers are doing, what the market is doing, and bringing it all together.
Pooling all those resources,
pooling all
wherewithal
together.
together.
So for
right?
example, UPI is free for all of us.
Yeah,
right?
true.
Isn't it? But everybody uses UPI only with a private player.
Yeah.
So obviously it has animal spirits in it.
Yeah.
Now, how does it have animal spirits if it's free to the consumer?
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Now you would say then it must be monetizing your data as the internet, but it's
Yeah.
not, right? Because
Right.
it's actually public infrastructure is very secure in that way. So then thinking about not only the UPI protocol,
Right.
but also the business model that
Yeah.
would, and then the policy architecture that would enable all that. That specifics
Right.
are what make the India story very,
unique,
very
yeah.
interesting and unique.
So one thing to touch on, speaking on UPI, just for any non-Indian listeners, it's a unified payments interface, right? And it's really changed digital transactions here in modern India. For example, I guess the best example I can give to any American or European listeners is if you have Venmo or Cash App or Apple Pay or Google Pay, whatever else, you can only make a payment to someone with that same app and platform. But thanks to UPI here in India, Mr. Sharad can have Google Pay and I can have Paytm, and we can send money back and forth all through this unified payments interface. So keeping that in mind, and that obviously we are definitely leaders in that sense, why do you think other countries have been maybe so reluctant or so slow, or do they simply not have the chops to get to this point wherein I can use a Venmo to send money to a PayPal and vice versa?
Yeah, the main reason is that, look, it's easier to do disruptive stuff if the old system is not very well established.
Yeah,
right?
that's the reality.
So
yeah.
in India, there was a need to have a mass market payment system, a digital payment system. And ordinarily, what should have stepped in would have been the credit cards, right? Or the cards. And we had only about 24 million people who had been given a credit card in 2016, although Visa, Mastercard had been in India for 30 years. And so that wasn't very well established, and it wasn't working, right? So if I'm a merchant, then, and I want to collect money by credit card, getting a merchant account is a 100-page agreement that I have to sign,
Yeah.
or he needed to sign at that
Back in
time.
the day, yeah.
Then you need a POS machine. I have to spend money, and then if somebody is paying me 100 rupees, I'm only going to get 98 rupees or so.
Right.
So it wasn't a proposition that was very attractive for small merchants.
Right.
In UPI, all that they need is a QR code that they have to print. They don't need any equipment. They don't need any new
Yeah.
POS machine,
Your operating
right?
costs are nil
Are
pretty much,
nil,
yeah.
actually. So, and they get all 100 of the 100 rupees that the customer is paying.
True.
So obviously, this system was more appropriate for India, and so therefore over time it took off. Now your question is, why are other countries not copying it? And they are. I mean, Brazil has a PIX system which is, as they describe it, inspired by UPI. There are other countries which are also taking it on. The global north is slower to take this on, and it's for the same reason that if you go to Europe, you are unlikely to see the Japanese or the Chinese bullet trains come to Europe,
Right.
right? Because they say, hey, our trains are
It
between
works,
250
yeah.
and 300 kilometers.
Yeah.
Yes, they're not 500 kilometers,
Yeah.
but we'll take what we have and build on it and
Right.
improve it. Why do we
If
need
it
to
ain't
rip
broke, don't
it
fix
out?
it, kinda, yeah.
Why should we do this? So UPI is the Chinese, Japanese bullet trains in the payment system.
Right.
And so those people who have a reasonably good, card-based payment system, as much of the global north does,
Yeah.
they are not necessarily interested. But
That's
the
a great
global
analogy.
south, which doesn't have a good payment system or digital payment system, just like India didn't have it 5 years ago, they are very interested, and they are taking it up and taking it on in a big way.
Absolutely. Wow. No, I think that's a great analogy, the bullet train one
Yeah.
especially. Going into maybe on the policy side a bit, right? Would you say also that our government has, created an environment which is, conducive to promoting digital public infrastructure in the India growth story? Is that they're obviously a huge stakeholder in this, right?
Absolutely. And without them, it won't have
It
happened.
wouldn't have been possible. Yeah.
And what the idea that just like digital public infrastructure unlocks innovation in the hands of the innovators to serve customers that may have been otherwise marginal customers and therefore could not be addressed. Digital public infrastructure, in the way the Indian model is, unlocks a new type of regulation in the hands of the regulator, and that is called techno legal regulation. So let's step back and think for a moment as to what the purpose of regulation is. The purpose of regulation is to have good behavior of the market players,
Right.
right? And basically, one way to do that is to say, if you don't behave properly, then I will put a fine on you, and I will,
Penalize them in some
penalize
capacity.
you,
Yeah.
and so on and so forth, right? And that public policy is framed to make that happen.
Right.
Now, in India, that is a somewhat weak tool that is there, simply because our court system are so clogged that
Yeah.
it leads to litigation, and then
So much
the whole thing
backlog and
is
everything,
there,
yeah.
right? And it becomes a harassment for
Yeah.
everybody concerned, and all kinds of problems arise. So the other way to think of it is that, why not think of public technology and public policy acting together to ensure good behavior of the people? And this approach is called techno-legal regulation.
Right.
Now, this techno-legal regulation turns out is very important in the digital space, particularly when it relates to data,
Right.
right? Why? Because the old model operates so slowly in a system that is not familiar with all the harms that can be caused by malicious players in the market,
Right.
that it is not able to actually provide effective governance, not
Absolutely.
just in India, actually you can say anywhere in the
In
world,
general, yeah.
right? But when you begin to think of public policy and public technology coming together, the metaphor, the picture I want to invoke in your mind is that if you are on a potter's wheel and trying to make a pot.
Yeah.
You need to apply both hands to make it happen. You
Yeah,
cannot do it
true.
with one hand. So
Absolutely.
those two hands are public policy and public technology.
Right.
So the Indian implementation of public infrastructure involves public technology
Right.
that let's say a phone pay innovate better as a payments player, but let's RBI regulate better as a regulator of the payment space.
Right. Yeah.
So that of course puts further burden on having good design of public technology, but that's the benefit that we have. We have hugely talented people in
Absolutely.
India, some world class people who are willing to devote time,
Right.
and small number of people can actually do extraordinary design.
Right.
So coming back to this, the Indian government has embraced this idea of
Absolutely.
techno-legal regulation. So
Right.
they become champions of this because they can see the benefits of serving the Bharat
Yeah.
market. They can see the benefits of better regulation, and therefore we are in a position to create better market ecosystems
Right.
than would have been the case earlier.
No, absolutely. I think it's very well put. And I think one thing which is so important is, like you said, using PhonePe and RBI as examples. You kind of have, okay, the central bank doing what they can do best, and a company like PhonePe, which has, I mean, no shortage of like capital resources, actual tech chops, doing what they do best. So merging the two is what really makes this such a potent beast, right, to be reckoned with. Going back to how, India can position itself as a leader in this space. I mean, and we already are leading. Is it something as simple as, hey, listen, here's the template, and we'll kind of sell it to you and walk you guys through it? What exactly does the global angle become? Like, how do we export this?
Yeah, we got to export it at three levels.
Okay.
One is in some cases, we can just give them a packaged solution, right? But for them to contextualize and implement it there, they need to understand the principles that it
Right.
embodies. So that's the second layer. And very often, even behind the principles, there are also standards that need to be taken into account because multiple things have to come together. So what India is slowly doing is to build institutions that can help uh, other countries in all the three dimensions,
Right.
right? So for example, there is an effort in triple IT Bangalore called MOSIP, and and that's been very successful. That provides a modular, open software for ID,
Yeah.
and it's being 10 countries are using it, and I think as of now about 90 million people have already been onboarded. Those 10 countries population is 350 million. So we will get there relatively quickly in about 12 to 18 months,
Yeah.
and there are enough countries in the queue that we should get to another billion people another 18 months from now.
Right.
So that's an example of making this available for free,
Right.
because India has a long tradition of giving away our cultural artifacts,
Yeah.
and I'll explain that also in a minute. So that's one. The second is the principles that underpin it. Now, the principles of design, like I said, you want it to be techno-legal regulation. How do you make sure that is done well? How do you make sure interoperability is
Right.
built in? How do you make sure that it doesn't change the balance of power between the citizen and the state,
Right.
right? So it does not give the government more
The
powers than
necessary. Yeah.
necessary, because India is a democracy and many of the countries that are taking this are democracies. So this
Right.
is an important issue for them. So there's a set of principles,
Right.
that are very, very important. And the last bit, of course, is standards. And so where are we today? We are slowly building out the institutional structure to be able to help people. With respect to principles, even these questions, how could you have something free if it has animal spirits, and is public infrastructure? So
Right.
how do market players make money? Without money they won't
What's the
have
incentive? Yeah.
animals. So what's the mechanism? What are the options? Is this right for us? Should we look at another option? Those kind of questions are going to be answered in a center of excellence that is being set up in IM Bangalore, and
Nice.
which is going to be inaugurated in the coming months. And so they will answer these kind of questions. And then we are at the cusp of setting up standard bodies, because today all the standard bodies are in the West, right? And so IETF, for example, is a standards body,
Right.
which owns the standards the fundamental standards of the internet.
Yeah.
What are those? Those are TCP/IP. It's SMTP, session a simple message transfer protocol. It's SIP, session initiation protocol, and so on and so forth.
Yeah.
So all those protocols are owned by that volunteer body
Right.
called IETF.
They kind of
So
have a monopoly on it, you'd say.
it's not a monopoly, but the point is we have a choice of giving our standards to them.
Yeah.
They'll happily take it with both hands
Yeah,
and
yeah.
then share it with the rest of the world.
Right.
But I think the current thinking is that India should actually create the new generation standards body
Right.
in a multi-stakeholder fashion so
Right.
that everybody has participation, because the countries that we are going to mostly serve are global south,
Right.
and we have a very high trust relationship with them today.
Right.
So therefore, and IETF focuses mostly on global north because
Exactly,
their
right,
public infrastructure was meant for global north. So it'll be best that we collaborate with each other but create our own standards body.
Right.
So I think another 1 or 2 years from now we'll have the institutional structure in place
Right.
that will allow us to share this much
We'll have
more
like the
effectively.
FDA for India stack essentially.
Yeah. So we'll have institutions like that,
Yeah,
and
yeah.
and now keep in mind that this is not a new concept if you take the long arc of history. So, for example, I often tell this story that the best Indian art is in London Museum. Now, they
It's a
can't have
fact,
a,
yeah.
yeah, and for understandable reasons, right?
Yeah.
And if they put a sign there, a plaque there, which says this is the best collection of Indian art, it'll invite lots of flack, right?
Yeah,
Because
for
people
sure.
say, how did you get it, right?
Yeah, yeah.
So they have to put something else there. So that something else is, this is the world's largest collection of copyleft art,
Ah,
right?
okay, yeah.
So the Indian art the Indian philosophy, deeply held, is different. So when you create a new symphony, let's say Beethoven created a new symphony, he owned the symphony. He had copyright on that symphony,
Yeah.
right? And recently, as you know, a new rag was created,
Yeah.
right? But in the Indian model, in classical music, when you create a new rag, it is a public good right from day one,
Yeah.
right? So a lot of Indian art, sculpture, music, and other forms of art are meant for public and therefore is public art. And so all that is happening is that India has a long tradition of sharing our own public goods with others, and that's
Right.
how yoga has traveled to the rest of the world.
It's like a
So
$20 billion industry in the
exactly.
States,
So
right? Yeah.
our way of thinking is that previously, there was Bollywood music, classical music, there was yoga and stuff like that. But now there is, in addition to those cultural artifacts, we now have technology artifacts
Right.
that are we built for ourselves,
Yeah.
for our own needs.
Yeah.
But we don't mind sharing with others, because if other countries like ours can benefit from it, that's good for us. It's good for
Exactly.
them, right? I
Right.
mean, and India has a long tradition of encouraging this to happen. So this is not being seen from the point of view of purely a commercial venture,
No, of
but
course.
as part of
Our
the
ethos,
long
essentially,
history,
yeah.
ethos,
Yeah.
and long history of India being a thought leader in the
Yeah.
world and providing these kind of artifacts to the rest
Right.
of the world.
Just a bit of a digression and no compulsion to answer anything. Just something you said kind of triggered this. When we speak about India and its long-standing history of kind of we're pretty lax about, like you said, sharing cultural artifacts and exports, right? I've always been curious as to at given that we were colonized and I mean by everyone under the sun, multiple European conquests, of course the Mughals, how do we kind of strike a balance between, hey, listen, it is very Indic of us, right, to ensure that we're not we're not claiming that this is exclusively for us, we want to share it with the world. How do we strike that balance of being inherently Indian and staying true to those cultural roots and ensuring that history doesn't repeat itself where we get swindled and taken for a ride? I guess like having standards and being global leader, of course, is one way. But my biggest fear is, people go like, oh, it's India, we've done them before, right?
Right.
How do we strike that balance?
Right. So there are two ways to do that.
Yeah.
At the tactical level, there's this wonderful new effort called NICE,
Yeah, of course.
which is focusing on making sure that if somebody claims in the West that they run a Ayurveda
Clinic or
clinic,
something, yeah.
and then it should conform to what Ayurveda is about, right?
Absolutely.
And So that is clearly something that we need to do more
Right.
effectively as we go forward. But there is a deeper answer to this, and the deeper answer is that we have to become an innovation society,
Right.
right? If you go back to maybe 11th century, Europe isn't the Europe that we see today.
No, absolutely.
Europe became Europe because there were series of revolutions that took place.
Yeah. And the
The, f-
Renaissance,
the first
Enlightenment,
is the
all that.
Renaissance, the art
Exactly. Yeah.
revolution,
Exactly.
which
Yeah.
happened in Florence, right?
Yeah.
Then there was a Protestant movement that started off in central Germany,
Yeah.
right? Martin Luther was, in uh, Frankfurt, or I don't exactly remember the place, but in central Germany, it started there, right? And partly triggered by the printing press
Yeah.
and the fact that the Catholic system there had all become about indulgences. So when people read the
Right.
Bible, they said, this version of Christianity and what Bible is saying, I
Are
can't
not adding up.
correlate.
Yeah.
I
Yeah. For
can't
sure.
correlate the two,
Yeah.
and that resulted in a very powerful kind of a movement,
Absolutely.
Reformation movement. That led to the scientific movement, which is
Absolutely.
where the Lunar Society comes in.
Right.
Right? There's a group of ragtag group, not even important people,
Yeah.
but who went on to become the James Watt of
Yeah.
steam engine, Priestley,
But they
who are
started off as
they,
underground,
but
right?
they
Yeah.
were all they. Why was it called Lunar Society? Because they used to meet on the full lunar night,
Yeah.
right? Because it would
Unbeknownst to anyone.
always
Yeah.
get late during the day, and the
Yeah.
meetings would run into the night. So at least they had some, hopefully
Yeah.
moonlight to get back home, right?
Yeah.
And so that transformed, and as you see and you read books, it changed the soul of the country, right? I mean,
Absolutely. Yeah.
that's how they describe it. But if you keep going further, then there was this whole transformation that came on the back of it, which is the industrial transformation. And then came this whole idea of European, governance, because they had a problem. They had villages, they had small towns where 50% of the people were Protestant and 50% of the people were Catholic,
Right.
and they couldn't agree on anything, like
Yeah.
the world that we have, polarized world, which is your podcast.
Yeah.
The gray
Yeah.
ceased to exist. So
Absolutely.
you are either this tribe or
Very
this
black
tribe.
or white. Yeah.
And
Yeah.
how do you now run a village,
Right.
right? And or
Absolutely.
a town or a city. So they had to reinvent what governance is. Can I do an aside which may be interesting for your
No, please.
listeners?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Where did that idea come from? It came from thermal baths in Germany. So in thermal baths in Germany, for medicinal reasons, everybody went in naked.
Yeah. Wow.
The whole family was naked.
Wow.
Family and friends were naked. But the rule was that when you're in a thermal bath, it's not about your nudity, because
Yeah.
you're there for medicinal purposes, not
Right.
about your sexuality.
Yeah.
It is really there for a purpose,
Yeah. Yeah. Absolutely.
which is for medicinal purposes.
Yeah.
So they asked themselves a question when this breakdown took place, first
Yeah.
in Germany and other parts of Europe, because tribes had formed and they
Right.
couldn't see eye to eye with each other. They were literally killing each other at
Yeah.
times. And so they said, how do we govern? So they said, look, I don't care whether you belong to this tribe or this tribe. When it comes to governance, we will
On the same team. Yeah.
ignore your tribal background. So we will ignore the fact that you're Protestant, or we'll ignore the fact that you are Catholic, right?
Right.
And we will create this intertribal space,
Yeah.
which is only for governance. So when we're
Wow.
talking about governance, and that is the idea that
Right.
took off, which said, let's separate religion
Church
from
and state,
church
essentially.
and state,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And then that became, of course, a prominent idea and became. Now we are back to square one today.
Yeah.
See, because, I have a friend who is an anesthetist. He was telling me that now in the US, with the new generation, what's it called? Gen Z,
Gen Z.
right?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
They have had to modify the rules about mobile phones. So now they have a protocol to sanitize the mobile phone, so that the mobile phone can be taken into the operations theater.
No
And sometimes
way.
when he is actually about to prick and put the person to give anesthesia,
Yeah.
and is telling that young patient, Gen Z patient, that now, this is going to kick in and
You're gonna
you'll
lose
fall
consciousness.
asleep,
Yeah.
and they're still on the phone at that point in time.
That's
And
crazy.
so now the implication of this is that when you are on your phone in your digital world, you're only in your tribal world,
Yeah. 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 For sure.
right?
Yeah.
And when you're in a tribal world, you have only one responsibility: to weed out, that free that world from fake, members of the tribe.
Imposters, yeah.
Imposters,
Yeah.
right? So now there is, for many of our people, young people especially, they are never living in any intertribal space at all,
Yeah.
because they are always in a tribal space. So therefore,
Absolutely.
communication has
Yeah.
broken down.
100%.
So one of the reasons I'm here
Yeah.
is, Anish, because what you are doing is
Yeah.
to try and create that white space or gray
Absolutely.
space, as you call it,
Yeah.
which is non-tribal in nature.
100%. Foster
right?
collaboration
Bec-
regardless of your
for,
background.
no
Yeah.
matter what opinion you
Exactly,
have,
yeah.
but let's look at the problem and
Yeah.
see if we can
Be solution
fashion,
oriented. Yeah. Yeah.
fashion
Exactly.
an answer to that. And I think that's the need of the hour. That is the
Absolutely.
imperative that
Yeah.
the every society has, because every society, we have people living in a digital world,
Yeah.
and
Yeah.
only in a
For
digital
sure.
world as we
For
go
sure.
forward.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
No, very, very well put.
Hmm.
And would you say that? So, I guess kind of going back to that is, given that access to tech is not decreasing anytime soon. India also has a ridiculously young population, right? We have I forget the exact number, but my question is, what gives you optimism, right? That, hey, listen, we have so many young people, whether you're in rural Haryana or Bihar, you have an internet connection, a smartphone with the same Instagram, Spotify that we're all using. What kind of gives you optimism that, hey, they will not fall prey to maybe what's happening to Gen Z in America, which is becoming so obsessed and fostering that repeat cycle of tribalism?
Yeah, and sometimes being called as the lost generation, right?
Yeah.
Uh, so let's unpack that,
Yeah.
right? I'm guessing you're mid 20s,
Yeah.
right? Let's look back at the 25, 30 years
Yeah.
that you've been around.
Yeah.
Some of it, of course, you weren't familiar, but
Yeah.
you know this because they're first-hand stories
Right.
that you can hear. You've seen an India change where, there has been some substantial welfare reform because of DBT, right?
Right.
If you're in India 3, you certainly have seen a revolution,
For
right?
sure, yeah.
There is little or no doubt.
For sure.
If you're in India 2, you have seen market arrive at your doorstep in a
Right.
way that was impossible
Right.
earlier. Some of that is still in the works. We think we're early stages.
But there's a delta between
But
then
there
and
is
now,
a
for
very
sure.
big delta, right? And so when open network for credit, open network for health, open network for commerce, and these open networks fully kind of take shape in the next few years, this will be fully there, right? So you've seen this reform that has happened. You've also, if you go further, you've seen physical infrastructure, and all this has happened because of digital infrastructure,
100%,
right? But digital
100%, yeah.
public infrastructure. But if you go back, you've also seen physical infrastructure change. I'm sure you remember how airports have changed
Oh, yeah,
in
yeah,
India,
absolutely,
how trains have
absolutely.
changed, how
Yeah.
roads have changed.
All of it.
This is all visible to you.
For
This
sure.
is something that you see all the
Yeah.
time. If you go further, you've seen how we've created world-class services companies,
Yeah.
right? If you look for, amongst the best IT services companies in the world,
Yeah.
comparable to Accenture, our TCS,
TCS, yeah,
Infosys,
yeah.
and all are comparable.
Yeah.
Our hospitals are world-class,
Yeah.
right?
India's a hotbed
Our-
for medical
our
tourism and
medical
stuff, right?
tourism.
Yeah.
Our airlines, compared to at least the airlines in the US, are certainly
Yeah.
very,
Yeah,
very
yeah,
good,
yeah,
right?
definitely,
So
even the airports
and
themselves. Yeah.
airports themselves are good. So we've been able to create large organizations. Our financial industry, HDFC Bank is amongst the best banks in the
Right.
world. I could go on and on. Our mobile operators, I lived for many, many years in the US, and if you compare, let's say, Geo or Airtel or with Vodafone
Or
and
T-Mobile or
AT&T,
something.
or our operators are certainly better,
Right.
right? And not only cheaper but also better.
Yeah.
So we've learned how to create these large scale services organizations,
Right.
and all this has come in some sense because of what happened in 91, 92,
Yeah.
which was a
Liberalization,
economic
yeah.
revolution. So there is a whole S curve that we have witnessed
Right.
over the last 30 years,
Right.
which is been the basis for, it has shaped the thinking of people.
Right.
It has given people a sense of optimism.
Right.
It's given people a sense of confidence. It has given people a sense of belief in their
Right.
own country, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
and so I think these are changes that are
100%.
important.
100%.
But where I want to focus is that this S curve is also reaching its peak,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
And why? What are the symptoms of this? We're not able to create enough jobs,
Right.
right? Why is that the case? Because the economic model that we have is not, geared for that. our education system is not geared to new pedagogy that we need to equip our people with, which is self-learning,
Yeah.
critical thinking.
Yeah.
We haven't done that. We are also not fully ready for the future, because our full readiness of the future is not to be better than Pakistan,
Yeah.
but
Yeah.
is
Of
to be
course.
better than China. Now, the
100%.
difference between that is that with vis-a-vis Pakistan, we are better in almost every
Yeah. Yeah.
facet that
Yeah.
you.
Yeah.
But if you compare with China, we've fallen behind
Right.
in a material, significant way
Right.
when it comes to building a science and technology-based
100%.
economy,
Yeah.
right?
100%. Yeah.
So as we look at this population,
Right.
they, while they are wedded in the last 30 years, we have to prepare them so
Right.
that India has this next orbit shift
Right.
for the next 30 years.
Right.
So we have to first tangibilize that shift so that they believe this is desirable,
Right.
this is doable,
Right.
and they have a place in making it
Absolutely.
happen,
Yeah.
right? And I think that requires a set of conversations that we are not doing sufficiently right
Right.
now, because and therefore these kind of podcasts are important,
Yeah.
and so therefore we have to figure out
Right.
what to do as we go there. Now, I'm optimistic. Why am I optimistic? That
Yeah.
was your question. Because to do this, our people have to represent a few things. They have to first not be completely mercenary.
Yeah.
They have to, in their job, they have to look for money and
Yeah.
meaning. And I think, I say this because, about 30% of our volunteers are under 30. I would say the young population is more idealistic than
Yeah.
my generation,
Wow. Yeah.
right? Because I grew up in an environment of scarcity.
Yeah.
Doctor ban jao, engineer ban jao,
That's it.
civil
Yeah.
service
Yeah.
mein chale jao. One of those
Three
things.
things. Yeah.
If you
Yeah.
didn't do that,
You're done. You're on
then
the
you miss
street,
the
kind of.
boat, and
Yeah.
so there was this scarcity principle, fear. You operated from there. In the last 30 years, people have not operated. They're more in touch with our cultural ethos,
Right.
which places enormous emphasis on inner work
Yeah.
and looking inwards, right?
Right.
So
Absolutely.
the second thing that is there is, I find that our people are wanting to be the best version of themselves,
Right.
and for that they are willing to participate in both Ranbhumi
Yeah.
and Rangbhumi.
Yeah.
So let me explain.
Please, of course.
If you want to be a marathon runner,
Yeah.
and you're a good marathon runner,
Yeah.
you obviously got to run marathon races, because
Yeah.
that will tell you whether you're getting better or worse,
100%.
right?
Yeah.
That is competitive.
Yeah.
And that competitive race, brings out juices inside you,
Yeah.
which forces you or encourages you to do
Adrenaline,
better.
dopamine, everything on the next
Dopamine.
level. Yeah.
That is the Ranbhumi. So when
Yeah.
you work inside a company, you're
Yeah.
in a Ranbhumi, because not everybody will get promoted.
Right.
And not every company will do well, right?
Right.
So that's Ranbhumi. But also, as a marathon runner, a lot of it will depend on how you handle pain in the last 30 minutes.
True.
Some of these Wimbledon matches at match points are won not because
He
your
knows how to hit a
physical skill
backhand or
is better
something.
than
Yeah.
me.
Yeah.
It is
It's
because
mental
I have
stamina,
more
yeah.
mental,
Yeah. Yeah. Heart,
capacity
soul, and spirit. Yeah.
and than you. So
100%.
therefore, working on that inner stuff is important,
Right.
and that requires you to be in a Rangbhumi. Rangbhumi is a theater stage.
Yeah.
Why is that important? Because on a theater stage, you're not competing with your actor.
Yeah.
You're competing with yourself to be
True.
the best version of yourself.
Absolutely.
So if we have to have a population that has the wisdom to be the best version and has the mechanism, they have to invoke both these elements. And the society that teaches everybody to think in these terms
Right.
is the Indian society.
True. Yeah.
Right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Isn't it?
100%.
So, and when you meet with people, you see people, they understand this, they are invoking this,
Right.
and so therefore they are out there.
Right.
Say, if my company doesn't give me, it gives me money but doesn't give meaning, I'm happy to volunteer
Yeah,
and find meaning.
Exactly. Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And so there is this unleashing of self-confidence, desire, and is there, which operates at the country level, operates at a company level, but it certainly operates at an individual level.
100%.
And I think, in this new world that we're talking about, which can be potentially disconnected, which loneliness can be rampant, it is people who embrace the Indian ethos, cultural ethos of seeing themselves
Yeah.
as people who have an obligation to be the best version of themselves, by working inside, not just outside. I'll finish this part with a plug for one of my favorite persons. His name is Fanendra Sama. He used
Yeah,
to be the
Red
CEO
Bus,
of
right? Yeah.
Redbus. You know, he he has redefined entrepreneurship in India. See, the Western idea, the American idea of entrepreneurship is to go west, right? So because that's how it's about frontier and going to the
Conquest
frontier,
and stuff. Yeah.
right, and conquer stuff. That generally is not understood deeply by an ordinary by a regular Indian, and
Yeah,
rightly so, because
absolutely.
that's not been our
That's not how
lived
we are. Yeah,
experience,
yeah.
right? So our lived experience, however, is that we are beings which have divinity inside, surrounded by junk, and our life's purpose is to get rid of the junk.
Yeah.
And to get rid of the junk, you got to place yourself in situations that there are self-limiting beliefs. Junk is stopping you from doing the next
Yeah,
thing,
yeah,
right?
absolutely.
And so entrepreneurship is a way to do that, because entrepreneurship is about what?
Leaving a
Is
comfort zone.
about
Yeah.
quoting adversity.
Yeah.
Is about, if your podcast is growing at 30% month on month, as an entrepreneur, you'll say, shit man, how do I make it grow at 50% month on month?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Now as you embark on that, right, it will push you outside your comfort zone.
For
And
sure.
as you pushes it outside your comfort zone, that gives you an opportunity to get rid of the junk that you have.
True.
So what Fanindra Sama says is that entrepreneurship is a self purification
Yeah.
process. And earlier, when he started saying that 10 years ago, he would get kind
Flag
of
for
a,
it. Yeah.
yeah, not even flag. People would think he's crazy.
Yeah.
No, and day before yesterday,
He's on like a different trip.
I
Yeah.
was in a launch of a VC fund, surrounded by entrepreneurs, and now that is the mainstream view
Yeah.
of an entrepreneur here in India. And that thinking, that by being able to now make entrepreneurship your own,
Yeah.
like we made rasgulla our own.
Yeah.
We've done that, right?
Yeah.
And it's impossible to think that it came from somewhere else.
Yeah.
This ability to do that to entrepreneurship,
Right.
and therefore link it up with our fundamental beliefs that life is not merely about outer goals, it's also about inner
Looking
goals.
within. Yeah.
And being able to see entrepreneurship as a way of doing that. And entrepreneurs are the backbone of the
Change
startup
makers. Yeah. Yeah. For
startup
sure.
revolution that you have.
Yeah.
And so this is why I'm optimistic, because the
Wow.
Bharat problems will be solved by Bharat entrepreneurs, hopefully using some of the digital public infrastructure and
Yeah.
more that is coming. And so I
Absolutely.
think we are
On
going
the
to
right
see
track,
this.
you'd
We are
say.
on the right track. I'm cautiously optimistic.
No, I think that's, I mean, super articulate. And there's so much in there which I think all our listeners should digest. And fun fact, like India is one of the few civilizations in the world which hasn't, had looking externally, conquest, and colonialism as, a centerpiece of our identity. We've always prioritized meditation, breathing, looking within. Mindfulness now is a very, sexy term people like to throw around. Even that has its roots in Indic origin. So fun little fact. And I agree. I think that combo, right, of our enterprising, never say die spirit and our Indic roots do bode well. But kind of just to play devil's advocate over here, is majority of when we talk about increasing in tech access at all three levels, right? India 3, India 2, and India 1. um Typically it tends to be an increase in social media, right? Typically, even if it's for professional business use and stuff, almost all major social media platforms are again non-Indian, right? You have your Chingari and stuff, but typically they're all American or something else. Then the second is whether it comes to consumption of content, listening to music. There's a huge correlation even in a country like India, where the higher your purchasing power and higher your increase in disposable income, the more access to the English language you're going to have, right? I think we can all agree with that. Which is why even English medium schools, you typically assume, okay, someone's from a certain income bracket. My question is now, if we subconsciously are relating prosperity and success with being exposed to American social media, listening to American music, watching Western movies, speaking a Western language, all these things, right? Isn't it that much tougher now to instill a sense of national pride in that person? Because I have associated success for so long with what I've seen on a Hollywood silver screen or listening to Spotify or all things that are inherently non Indian, right? So, how is it possible to kind of again balance that increase in prosperity, access to tech, globalization, but still not, I guess, lose that sense of self and where we come from?
Yeah, it's a very good question, and it's something that we should seriously worry about.
Yeah.
So, we have a roadmap of stuff that will come out as digital public infrastructure, right? Uh, but one of the most important ones that we haven't publicly talked about, so this is the first time
Nice. Okay. Yeah. Yeah. Whole
this is
lot of great
happening,
gets a
is
exclusive on this one.
is
Yeah.
about curation.
Right.
See, what has happened is that, let's say, I was on Twitter an hour ago, and I go back and visit Twitter again. In those 2 hours, perhaps 20 million messages have
Yeah. Gone through. Yeah.
gone through, right? And I have the time to only see 20 or maybe 200 of them, right? Whatever that number may be. Now, there is an AI system that picks those 20 out of the 2 million.
Right.
Is that
Yeah. Yeah.
That's
That's
true
right.
for Facebook, that's true for Instagram, that's true for
Any
everything else
company.
that we
Yeah.
have. Now, that picking algorithm, that curation, is not controlled by me.
Yeah.
If I had full control over it,
Yeah.
then I could mitigate some of the problems that
Right.
we're talking about. Maybe I don't want to spend time, training that algorithm
Yeah.
or setting that up. Then I should have a choice to say, hey, if I'm not going to do it, I'm okay if this community that I'm part of does it for me,
Right.
right?
I'll outsource it to them, kind
So
of.
I outsource it to them. And if that community is not willing to do this, then I'm willing to say, look, I don't mind if my country chooses the stuff
Right.
that is there. As a last resort, is a faceless, entity that is not vested in my life in any meaningful way, is actually controlling this.
Right.
So what we need is actually a new type of a digital public infrastructure
Right.
that puts the control of curation in the hands of the individual,
Right.
right? Now, if you remember, what is India Stack about and why it's worked is because it gives agency to the citizen.
Right.
And we have to find a way to give agency to the citizen in the social media world.
Right.
Now, this is, of course, not easy to do. It is hard to do because those companies are going to push back.
Yeah, of course. Yeah. As in,
in
they
a-
have very little
in-
incentive to comply, right?
yeah,
So-
and in a big way. But I would venture to, I'll just leave it at this, that if at all any country can pull it off,
It's
it
us,
is
yeah.
India.
Yeah, fair
So
enough.
so watch out for this
Yeah.
next year and late next year. And so it is things like this
Right.
that will allow us to do that. Now, of course, the question also is that in some ways, when we say social media is changing culture, it's changing therefore politics, because politics is downstream from culture. Uh, uh, what we really are saying is that AI is changing that,
Yeah.
right? Because actually, social media is the first full manifestation of AI.
Right.
The the half manifestation of AI was advertising, right?
Yeah.
Digital advertising. So both of these obviously are changing culture,
Right,
and therefore
absolutely.
downstream they're changing many other things as we go forward. So the question is, it's not merely by controlling social media, it is by becoming an AI power in the world,
Absolutely.
right?
Yeah.
And that's a longer topic. But the question is India merely going to be a consumer of AI models of the West,
Or a
or
producer,
China, because
yeah.
these are the two people
Behemoths,
that
yeah.
were, or will it be a model maker by itself in the
Right.
world? And I think if this question be answered in a material way, then it'll be good. Now, unlike what I talked to you about curation, which is, we all have to wait till maybe end of next year or early 2025, this part on AI is going to come in the
Sooner.
next 2 months or so.
Wow.
So there's a major change that is coming, and we've done, actually, it is not new, it's been in the public domain. So what we have done with account aggregator or personal health records, which is mediating the flow of personal data, is using a protocol called DEPA, Data Empowerment and Protection Architecture. We've always said that the current version is only half of it. It's called the inference cycle. And the training cycle is coming next, and the training cycle is coming next, and the training cycle then underpins a new type of AI economy. And hopefully, if it works here in India, it will work in other parts of the world.
Right.
So I think we'll have three poles there. We'll have an American pole, a Chinese pole,
And an
and an
Indian
Indian
bowl.
pole.
Wow. Okay. Yeah. Fingers crossed for that.
Hmm.
Just to touch on something you said is like culture is these days getting shaped by artificial intelligence, right? I think there's no doubt about that. One thing I wanted to, I guess, get your take on is just let me ask you a question. So last month was actually Men's Mental Health Month,
Hmm.
right? A bit of a digression, but
Hmm.
you'll see where this all comes
Hmm.
together. If you had to, again, one of the lowest, least talked about social media causes and stuff for men's mental health, kind of went under the radar. Um, so X number of suicide victims in India last year. If you had to take a guess, what percent were men? What would you say?
I have to believe the majority are men. I think the
Yeah,
gap is very, very wide between
yeah,
men and women. I don't
yeah.
know the numbers, but I
Take a
would,
guess. Take a
yeah,
guess.
I would say 70, 80% would be
Yeah,
men.
that's a very
Yeah.
good guess. It's
Huh. Hmm.
75%
Yeah. Hmm.
of suicide victims
Hmm.
were men. That's pretty much on the money. What? So we have roughly what 1.4 billion odd people in our country, right? How many licensed therapists do you think we have in our country?
Must be very few, maybe
Take a guess.
10,000 or
Yeah, again
something.
on the
Huh.
money. Yeah,
Huh.
it's
Huh.
around like it's between 11 to
Sure.
15K
Huh.
are prudent estimates.
Hmm.
Those are great guesses. But
Huh.
so my question is, do you see? I mean, given that every like in a room of 10 people who are all suicide victims, seven of them would be men. That's just an alarming stat, right? And in India, there's obviously mental health is stigmatized. There's barely any therapists available. Do you see AI in the Indian case specifically playing a huge role in addressing this market gap of therapists? Because by the time we build institutions and have more licensed therapists and destigmatize mental health for men and women, that's all macro level changes, right? That'll take a century. AI kind of can happen more quickly, right? So do you think like having something like an artificial chatbot or an artificial therapist, which will redirect you to a suicide helpline or a professional therapist number, do you kind of see that having massive potential in our country, which obviously has massive mental health problems?
Yes. And but an American, so there are two ways to think about it.
Yeah.
One way is that we augment the therapists that are already there,
Okay.
right? We can see AI is going to do that with programming, and you
Right.
always hear this, every company wants to hire a 10x programmer,
Yeah.
at 3x the price,
Yeah,
right?
for sure.
But usually there are very few, they're not there all the time. So what AI is going to do is going to turn a 5x programmer into a 10x
Right.
programmer, is going to take a 1x programmer and turn into a
Yeah.
4x
Just
programmer,
amplify them essentially.
right?
Yeah.
And so now, of course, one role of AI is therefore to augment,
Yeah.
to make a doctor a super doctor, a
Yeah.
teacher a super teacher, a
Yeah.
therapist a super therapist. And that is very important. Now, my point, however, is that to deal with a suicidal male, or for that matter, female, a young suicidal person in India, the answer to that is not the same as the answer. The conversation that you need to have
Yeah.
with that individual is not the same conversation that you'll have in the West.
Right.
Because simply because people are planted,
Yeah.
their world is different, right? I mean,
Absolutely.
and so you have to have that different conversation.
That
So
cultural context
the
is
cultural
everything, right? Yeah.
context is everything in these moments of
Absolutely.
stress, right?
Yeah.
And if you don't connect culturally, then it'll appeal to a small sliver of what we call as 1A. 1A, remember, is 100 million
Yeah.
families.
Yeah. Yeah.
Is 1A is 30, 1 is 100 million families, 1A is 30 million families,
Wow.
right? But those 30 million families are the ones who read English newspapers.
Yeah.
They,
Listen
you
to
know,
Spotify and
they
stuff.
listen to
Yeah.
Spotify and stuff like that.
Yeah.
So that, the Western uh, AI engine may still help
Yeah. But
the
that's a
the
drop in the
30,
ocean.
but
Yeah.
that's a drop in the ocean, right? That's
Yeah.
30 million families out of the 300 million families that we have.
Right.
So we need something for the remaining 270
Absolutely.
million families. That has to be culturally, it has to
Right.
fit that culture.
Yeah.
And if you have to fit that culture,
It has to
that
be made
has
by
to
us.
be,
Yeah.
it has to be made by us. And
Absolutely.
if we therefore become only a consumer of AI models,
Yeah.
it won't be made for us.
Right.
So why would anybody
What
bother to make
incentive do
it?
they
Yeah,
have? Yeah,
they
for
won't even
sure.
understand what we are talking about.
Exactly.
Until we make a model making country, it'll not happen. So
Wow.
I think what you're saying is absolutely right.
Yeah.
Now, there is a facet of what you're talking about, which is the gender dynamics, which I think is completely broken. It's very controversial. I won't get into details.
Yeah.
But yes, I think what is happening is that we are losing this bearings on on young men, right?
Yeah.
And they are they, we have to make sure we don't lose them,
Yeah, yeah, for sure.
because no society, just the way we shouldn't lose young girls, we
Yeah,
shouldn't
yeah,
lose young
absolutely,
boys.
absolutely.
But right
Like
now
I
the
would argue,
pain is
women
on
are worse off if 70% of dudes are killing themselves,
yeah,
right?
yeah,
Like
yeah,
for
yeah,
sure.
yeah. So absolutely. So I think uh, yeah, we have to sort that issue. Hmm.
Absolutely.
Hmm.
I want to touch a bit upon globalization. You know, we live in a globalized economy. Tech has brought us, closer than ever, yet so distant. What is kind of, it's this whole in globalization and tech. I think an age-old debate, which we've always been having since, I guess, Renaissance era times as humans, is this balance between privacy and security, right? And I'm sure you've heard the famous, I think it's a Ben Franklin quote. Correct me in the comments if I'm wrong, where he says, "Oh, if you give up privacy for security, you'll end up having neither," right? So today, how do you view it, right? When we talk about digital infrastructure in public interest, collaborating with private companies, um, how is privacy like an ideal that we have to aspire to? Is it still a reality? Do we all have to operate on the assumption that some version of the NSA just has access to, all our messages and everything we've ever said digitally, or kind of your 2 cents on that? And is the sense of collective security while maintaining individual privacy still possible?
Yes. So clearly there is a camp which says privacy is an construct which has outlived its utility in the digital world,
Yeah.
and iSpirit is not in that camp at all.
Yeah.
We also think the way we frame this is privacy and personalization. So the loss of privacy that is happening is that people are trading it for personalization,
Right.
right? So because they are saying, hey, I want a personalized feed on my social media, I want a personalized loan,
Yeah.
I want a personalized study plan,
Right.
right? I want a personalized ad,
Yeah.
right?
Personalized shopping list,
And
Amazon. Yeah.
personalized shopping list, right? So in return for all this, they offer their personal data, because
Yeah.
how can you personalize without
If I don't know
having
anything about you, yeah.
and that has become the way this is implemented today has resulted in loss of privacy.
Right.
So the question that we have to answer, and I think India has already answered that with DEPA, and this is going to become stronger and stronger because our account aggregator system is rocking now. We're growing still at something like 22% month on month.
Wow.
Is going to be one of the most, it's already one of the biggest systems in the world. Now what it does is it actually reframes this conversation, and let me see if I can explain this very easily. We believe you have a right to personalization, and personalization means I must offer up some of my personal data,
Yeah.
but that data is mine. I own that data. I have the golden copy of my personal information.
Right.
What I am willing to give to you is a silver copy,
Yeah.
which is only for that purpose of personalization. So
Yeah.
I've applied for a loan.
Yeah.
I want a personalized loan.
Yeah.
So I'll give you whatever you need,
Right.
but that's a silver copy. You give me a loan offer, which I may accept or not, because I may have given the same,
Right.
loan application to others. And but if either way, whether you gave me a loan or you didn't give me a loan, that silver copy extinguishes itself.
Right.
So if I come back to you asking for a loan again 3 months later,
Yeah.
I will again give you my data. You
Yeah.
don't have to store it on your side. It's
Right.
called purpose limitation.
Like once you give me those targeted ads, get rid of it, kind of. Yeah.
Absolutely, right?
Right.
And so therefore you cannot reshare that data.
Right.
Now, why is that important? In America, in the US, there is consent for collection, but there's no consent for sharing.
Yeah.
The Indian data regime is built entirely on consent for sharing.
Wow.
So let's say, I'll give you an example. I want a better predictor of a keyboard, which is going to predict my next words, and says if I know what your calendar is, this, that, and the other, I'll be able to make better predictions of what you're going to write on your
Yeah.
phone. I say fine, but it's only for that purpose.
Yeah.
Now that you have that data, if somebody comes to you and say, hey, can you give me Sharad's data?
Yeah.
You don't have the
You have no
right to
business doing
share.
that. Yeah. Yeah.
You can only share if I have given you consent for sharing.
Yeah.
Now, consent for sharing should be enforceable. So, in the Indian system, only system in the world so far, it is completely electronic in nature.
Wow.
So it is, therefore it is described by a, a mnemonic called organs. What is that? It is open, so yes, people can come and ask this entity saying, you have the silver copy of Sharad's data, can it be shared? And the law says it cannot be shared without permission. That permission has to be electronic in nature. So that's an open system. It's revocable. I may have given the permission, but I've changed my mind.
Right.
So it is granular. I may say, okay, you can change and give something only for the last week and nothing else. It is auditable, and it so when my data is shared, I get a notification, right? It's like when you use UPI and money is transferred, you get an SMS saying
Yeah.
from the bank. So there is better protection. So you know where
Yeah.
your data is going, and it is fully secure. So it's
Right.
fully, nobody else can, because it's all encrypted and so on and so forth. So this system is now the gold standard.
Right.
So Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank to central bank, because it's been first implemented in the financial space in May of last year, has asked all countries in the world to evaluate themselves against the India DEPA model,
Wow.
right?
That's game
Now, where
changing.
does it originate? Right? We must also understand this. So I think India will lead the data revolution over time. One of the reasons is called the Puttaswamy judgment.
Yeah.
So Puttaswamy judgment, which if I remember right, it came in July 2017, is uh, is a 9-0 judgment of the constitutional bench. And so overriding it is very hard. You have to
Yeah.
have an 11 bench judgment,
Yeah.
and then out of the 11, 10 have to agree.
Yeah. Exactly. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
it's very unlikely to happen. And it says privacy is a fundamental right,
Yeah.
right? We are the first country in the world to make this kind of a statement. And this is important because it means it's fabric of the constitution. It's not easy to change, and all the laws therefore will be tested against this judgment.
Right.
And this techno legal approach that we are taking, which I described to you a moment ago, again, if this was just policy, it will just be a paper policy.
Right.
Nobody will be able to enforce it, because where will you go to court? What happened? Courts will be clogged. Nothing will happen. Because it's a techno legal implementation, it gives you, as because it's a digital public infrastructure of an Indian kind, part of India stack, it gives you the capacity to both innovate, to give me personalized
Yeah.
products and services, as well as keep my privacy completely secure.
Best of both
So
worlds, kind of.
we
Yeah.
have therefore reframed that debate.
Right.
And this framing is now the framing which is starting to move to other parts of the world.
Wow. The Bank of International Settlements thing, I had no idea. That's
Yeah.
really, really optimistic for us. Kind of moving forward on this same topic of, okay, globalization, where we stand, is, do you like most things, for example, yoga? There are a lot of yoga practitioners overseas who probably don't even know yoga is Indian, right? Just straight off the bat, that's a reality I think we all grapple with. Similarly, how common is it that, again, it's not like every civilian has to know this, but players in this ecosystem, right? How common is it that, okay, people are aware of this Bank of International Settlements verdict? People are aware of India Stack being a pioneer in some sense. People are aware of the fact that we are drawing this distinction between privacy for personalization and privacy for collective security. Or is it another case where, oh, you know what, like, India, we don't have to really credit it. We can kind of, skirt around that. So just your take on that.
No, I think it is getting out. Why? Because I think we're very powerful social evangelists
Yeah.
who take this out. For example, on the data side, Chris Gopalakrishnan,
Yeah.
who
Ex-Infi,
also
right?
ex-Infi, who
Yeah.
also chaired the NPD Non-Personal Data Committee, has been at the forefront to educate and evangelize people.
Right.
In many other areas, for example, UPI, an account aggregator, Nandan has been
Yeah, of
involved.
course.
In many of our policy areas, Mohan Daspai has been
Yeah.
involved.
He's been
Uh,
on the show actually
yeah,
for,
yeah.
yeah,
Ramadorai,
yeah. Okay.
who's the former CEO of TCS, has been
Yeah.
involved. We have, luckily, a large community of social evangelists who are taking this message forward, because in a no greed, no glory model, it's very easy to do
Yeah.
that, right?
True, true, true. Yeah.
I think it is going out. But I want to make another point, which I think is important to keep in mind. It might appear that everything that we do should be given away, And I think that is true for one class of things. For a digital public infrastructure, everything
Right.
should be given away. But our power, economic power as a country, will come from being in what we describe as a circle of five. So let me explain what circle
Please,
of
yeah,
five is.
yeah.
Circle of five is there are 60 countries that have sent satellites to space, but there are only 5 countries that can actually transport the satellites to space. India
Right.
is one of them,
Yeah, wow.
right? There were only 5 countries that had a COVID vaccine. You had US, you had UK, you had Russia, China, and India,
Yeah.
right? So this is a circle of five, right? Now you have. Do you know of a country that doesn't have a mobile operator? Many have many
Yeah.
mobile operators, but all the operators are mostly supplied
Right.
by
The
a
same group of
group
people,
called
industry.
HENS:
Yeah.
Huawei, Ericsson, Nokia, and Samsung.
Wow.
Now, if Huawei cannot sell in the Western world, will an Indian company replace it? Will India become part of that circle of five?
Yeah.
That is what will determine whether we are a powerful economic nation or not.
Right.
So we, as iSpirit, have to hold both the thoughts. In some areas, our goal is to be in that circle of five,
Absolutely. Yeah, yeah.
right?
It's not
Not in
some
the
free for
circle of
all thing.
60. It's
Yeah.
not free for all.
Yeah.
It is actually, that is where our economic power will come. That's where our
Absolutely.
wealth will come from, right?
Absolutely. Yeah.
Because we are able to own something there. But there are some parts where this is like yoga.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
built it for ourselves, but let the world have it,
Yeah,
right?
yeah, for sure.
So I think we need to keep both these objectives in mind. Now, of course, when we talk about DPI, we keep only this objective in mind. In iSpirit, there's an equally important effort which is called the Vishwamitra effort, which is only about the circle of five effort
Wow,
that is
okay.
there, right? Because if as a country, right, we don't become, we are today in circle of five only in a few things. Some things digital, you could say vaccines, space. There are not many areas where in the circle of five.
Right.
Unfortunately, in the places where it matters, for example, industrial sewing machines, which powers garment industry, we are not there at all. We are not even in the circle of 10, right?
Wow.
And it's dominated by 3 countries: China, Japan, and Germany. That's a shame, because that's where, so China will make more money from our garment exports than we will make ourselves,
Wow. I did not know
because the
that.
real value is in industrial sewing machines.
Yeah.
Supposing we have the world's largest airline,
Yeah.
right? Who supplies it to them? Boeing and Airbus.
Yeah.
There's never been a year, other than COVID, never been a year where the combined profits of Boeing and Airbus are less than the combined profits of the entire airline industry of the world,
Yeah. These two are behemoths, essentially. Yeah.
right?
Yeah.
Microsoft is now doing well. It had a bad profit year in 2013. But in 2013, it made more money
Than
than the
anyone else.
top 20 IT services companies of the world put together.
Wow. Like, that's a dream year for them. Yeah.
Now, now, of course, they're making so much more money that it's not even comparable.
Yeah.
Cisco is having a bad year. They're not part of the hens. They would love to be part of the hens. Kind of,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're not doing that well. Yet they made more money than the top 5 European mobile operators. That includes Telefonica, includes Vodafone, the number one, Telefonica, the number two, and others.
Wow.
So the point is, one of the problems that we have,
Yeah.
which we haven't upgraded our thinking, is that how value capture happens in the modern world is different from the value capture that happened previously.
Right.
Previously, if you had cotton, you turned this into yarn, you can turn this into cloth, and then
It
into a
has utility
kurta.
for someone. Yeah.
No matter which stage you were, you made money.
Yeah.
So if you have oil that is taken out in Saudi Arabia, refined in Jamnagar, and sold in Bangalore, all the 3 players make money,
Right.
right? But let me ask you, and ask your viewers, if they use, for example, a Windows machine, Wintel machine, they may know that 86% of the profit pool of the laptop PC ecosystem is controlled by Intel and Microsoft.
Yeah.
So the person who made the screen, which is not easy to make, who made either the hard disk drive or the solid state drive, who designed and made the PC, who put it all together, who sold it, who
Are making
branded it and
peanuts,
sold it, gets
essentially.
14%.
Damn.
So
What does an
therefore,
Intel do apart from
so
the processing
so
chip?
so no, because see, they are what the three things that we haven't done as a country from an economic perspective is that we first didn't understand there is that uneven value capture in the value chain,
Right.
right? Because we were told by IMF and World Bank and others saying, don't worry about this, right?
Yeah.
So we are very loyal followers of all that stuff. So
Yeah.
we didn't worry about it, right?
Yeah.
So that is number one. Number two is that if you agree that this is uneven, then you have to figure out what's going to be strategic.
Right.
And then to make it strategic, you have to build an ecosystem because unless there are dozens of companies coming up, you won't see a winner. Market has to
True.
decide the winner. We made a mistake, so we didn't do the second analysis. In finding winners, we did something that even China, as a communist country, doesn't do. In India, we said ECIL shall be our electronics winner. C dot will be our telecom winner. And we anointed winners on day one.
Yeah.
China doesn't do that.
Yeah.
China lets the market develop
Right.
and anoint. Then the
Let
market
them compete
decides.
and figure
The
it out.
market
Yeah. Yeah.
decides.
For
Now
sure.
they have 300 EV car companies.
Yeah.
Out of that, winners will emerge,
Yeah.
and then they will say become national champions, and they'll help them go global,
Yeah.
right? But they're not. They're
We're
not
not propping
picking.
it up
They're
from day
not
one.
propping it
Yeah.
up right now.
That's
So
true.
the US decided that we want a private space transportation industry. Lockheed, Boeing,
SpaceX.
SpaceX and others are competing. They're not choosing the winner. The
Yeah.
market is
May the
choosing the
best
winner.
one win. Yeah.
Now
Yeah.
it appears SpaceX has won.
Yeah.
So therefore, it's easy for them to anoint them as winners.
Yeah.
We don't do that, right?
Right.
And
We
so
kind of intervene and pick our own
we
winners. Yeah.
and therefore that winner says, why do I have to worry? Yeah, I'm been
Yeah.
declared a winner.
Yeah.
I don't
From
have
day
to do
one.
it.
Yeah.
I've been so we therefore we have to change our economic philosophy.
Right.
So I think what has happened is
Right.
that we are now at a moment, 30 years later, for as big a revolution in our economic thinking as what happened in 91, 92.
Wow.
Because that S curve has played itself out. It's
Yeah.
peaked.
It's run its course,
not giving
kinda,
us it's not giving us the wins that we need anymore.
Yeah.
So we need this new thinking, which is the circle of five thinking,
Yeah.
which requires us to unlearn some beliefs that we had earlier and find a new way of building ecosystems and creating the winners that we need. Now, there are 6 experiments that iSpirit is involved in that
Yeah.
are happening, which we call as Vishwamitra. If 3 of them succeed,
Yeah.
then I think we'll have a template.
Wow.
That template can then help us. If we were a Korea or a Thailand, 3 succeeding would be enough to propel us from a middle income company
To a high
to
income
a
income.
high level,
Wow.
right? But we are not. We
We're
are,
very low
we are
income.
15 times the size of those countries, right?
Right.
And so we need many more.
Right.
And so we need at least, to be realistic, we need roughly about 10, 12. For having 10, 12, we need, instead of 6 bets yielding 3, we need to be able to make at least 16, 17 more bets that will yield another 8 more. But
Right.
that template has to be clear. And my belief is that when history is written, iSpirit's biggest contribution will not be India Stack and DPI.
What will it be?
It will be this new template that we are talking about.
Wow. Okay. And that
Because
can propel
that
us
is
into the
what
circle
puts
of
us
five.
to product nation.
Yeah.
Remember, our DPI and India Stack was a defensive move,
Right.
so that we don't become a digital colony.
Right.
And I will say mostly that has happened other than social media.
Right.
And because we own our own identity, identity is always going to be digital. In any other country, how will you know that you're digital? You will ask Apple, because they do face recognition,
Yeah.
or Google, to tell you whether this person is really that person. The
Right.
only place where this is not going
Is
to be
India,
true
yeah.
is India and those 10 countries that have adopted the Indian
Framework,
MOSIP
yeah.
solution, right?
Yeah.
Same, we own our own payment system. You talked about UPI. It's already doing 46% of the digital payments of the world,
Yeah.
right? And we'll hit 50%
Shortly,
relatively
yeah.
quickly. So for data, as I described, we have a unique and the most modern data infrastructure system that lets you get personalization without compromising your privacy. So I think we've done the data colonization bit. I
Yeah,
would say
yeah.
reasonably good. But
We've
it
reacted
does-
smoothly, you'll say.
But it doesn't get us to being a product nation.
Okay.
Because the value, economic value, it comes from being in that circle of 5
Right.
in a number of areas. Otherwise, you will be a Thailand, not a Korea. Can I
Yeah.
expand on that?
Please, yeah, yeah.
Right?
Of course, yeah.
You know, who do you think has higher per capita? Now let me ask you a question.
Yeah, probably
Huh?
South Korea, I'd imagine.
Yeah,
Yeah, for
it's
sure.
5.6 times that of Thailand.
Wow,
But
okay.
in 1974,
Yeah.
Thailand was more than Korea.
Really? Wow.
And Korea was completing 20 years after the Korean War, said, hey, this is good, but we are capable of more. And they changed. What did they change? They said, we're going to become a country that actually has products to sell to the rest of the world.
Right.
Right. By virtue of being able to do that in a number of areas that we know their
Yeah.
brands,
Samsung,
Samsung,
Kia,
Hyundai,
yeah.
Kia, and all. But we don't know that shipbuilding is mostly Korean
Korean, wow.
and so on and so forth. But they've done it in a number of areas, and but all that has happened since 1974, and they're 6 times or 5.6 times. Now, don't forget that. Let me ask you, during this period, from 74 to let's say 2000, who has had higher per capita growth, per capita income
Between
growth,
South Korea and
between
Thailand?
that obviously is South
Yeah.
Korea, between Thailand and China?
Possibly China, yeah.
No, it's Thailand.
Oh, it's Thailand? Wow.
The
Wow.
remarkable thing is that China has managed to almost keep pace with Thailand,
Yeah.
although it's a very big country.
Yeah.
So what Korea is done is broken out. So when
Yeah.
we in India talk about how remarkable is China,
Yeah.
we fail to understand how super remarkable is Korea.
Korea, yeah. True. What they've done is mind blowing.
Right?
Yeah, yeah,
So
for
we
sure.
are at a fork in the road now.
Yeah.
Will we be a Thailand of tomorrow?
Or a Korea.
Where can you name a Thai brand to me?
Red Bull is originally Thai,
But
right?
it's not a Thai brand. It's not owned by
Yeah, now Austrians
yeah,
run it. Yeah,
yeah.
that's true. Yeah,
So
that's it. I just said Red
that's
Bull.
it.
Yeah.
But you can obviously name Korean brand.
Yeah.
So will we be a Thailand of the future or a Korea of the future?
Yeah.
Will we be a Spain of the future?
Yeah.
I hope your Spanish listeners don't
Yeah.
get upset with this.
No, of
Or
course.
the French of France of the future.
Right.
So tell me, is Spain in G20?
No, it's not.
No.
Oh, it is?
What do we? No, it's
Oh,
not.
it's not, right? Yeah.
What do we
Yeah.
buy from France? We buy submarines.
Yeah.
We buy nuclear plants.
Yeah.
We buy
Jets
Rafale
also, right?
planes.
Yeah,
We
yeah.
buy Airbus.
Yeah.
Right? What do we buy from Spain right now? Olive oil.
Yeah.
So are we going to be an olive oil country,
Yeah.
or are
Or
we
Rafale
going
country, yeah.
to be a Rafale country?
Wow.
That
Yeah.
is the next 30 years.
Yeah.
And my submission to the young listeners that we have is, this is what they must become part of.
Right.
This is what will give them the impetus
Yeah.
that the liberalized economy gave to people of my age group.
Right.
Which is that it opened up
Right.
the economy and we were able to participate in it. This new India that is going to emerge, which is a product nation India,
Yeah.
which is, it looks impossible today,
Right,
but
yeah.
it is not impossible at all.
Right.
It will happen. And that's the India they must become part of.
Wow.
And to be part of this India, they have to figure out what type of a person they need to become.
Yeah.
They either have to embed themselves in science and technology, live at the cutting edge of technology and scientific ideas, or they have to live in the world of people and be entrepreneurs who can bring smart people together, because it's a multidisciplinary group of people that will
sure.
actually. So they either have to exert people leadership, in which case they have to be able to work with the Sheldons
Yeah.
who will belong to the other world,
For
right?
sure, yeah,
And so therefore in this barbell kind of economy, it's going to be these two poles, and we need both of them
100%.
for India to become
It's not either or
a
function,
new
it's an
type
and
of an
function,
economy.
yeah.
For us
Absolutely.
to change the structure of the economy. We've done it in the last 30 years, and it is time for another orbit shift as we
Wow.
go forward.
You spoke about all this reason for being optimistic about how India should position itself as a product nation, break into the circle of five. You gave the juxtaposition between a South Korea and a Thailand. All that I buy. One concern I have is, I think, see, look, we banned TikTok and stuff, right? But we banned them not because it was dumbing down our population. We banned it because it was an India-China geopolitical situation, right? And we have like our own Indian counterparts to TikTok, which I would argue have the same self-fulfilling purpose, right? Catering to the lowest common denominator, and it's a race to the bottom from there. How do we kind of spread this message that, hey, listen, you can be either at the cutting edge of tech and at this frontier, or you can be someone who mobilizes capital, labor, resources, and be an enterprising individual, when I think there's, again, I'm not going to get into whether it's orchestrated and intentional, but there is in front of us this ongoing dumbing down of our population, right? Attention spans are lower than ever. People are more depressed than ever. People are, spending less time outdoors and engaging in physical activity than ever. In fact, Pragat, my guy behind the camera, he was just telling me about how his one of his family members has a 2-year-old son or 2-year-old daughter with access to an iPad. So all these 4, 5 things are certainly variables in really dumbing down our population, right? How do we kind of solve for that?
Luckily for us, our our culture resurgence has to happen. This is the only way to do this,
Yeah,
and we have to engage AI to bring about that cultural
right.
resurgence. This is the only answer. That luckily we know the answers. It's not something so the fact that we can have this tacit knowledge about the culture go from one generation to the next used to work like a charm.
Yeah,
It is not working now because there is no teacher.
yeah,
That intergenerational transfer is not working, and this new teacher that has to emerge
yeah,
has to be based on AI.
right,
And so to my mind, there is a resurgence to some extent about Indian cultural values as well, right? And
right.
you can see that happening. And I think if we let that happen, right? And in some in the strictly uh, root word would be conservatism, cultural conservatism. That doesn't mean that we go back to some old bad
Yeah, yeah,
practices.
no
But the
barbarian stuff.
fact
Yeah.
is that in some sense, and I remember this beautiful interview between Amish Tripathi and Barkha Dutt,
Okay.
or in Lucknow or somewhere in UP. This was filmed.
Was that a lit fest or something?
I don't. It wasn't. It was actually a school. There was some school event or something. But
Right. Yeah.
and Amish Tiwari made a very Tripathi. I think he made a very powerful. He said, in some sense, when it comes to any segment that of the population that we're talking about, if you're looking for progressive values, we have them inside our own culture,
Right.
right? And we have to use that as the foundation to amplify it within the rest of the society. Pointing to what's happening in the West doesn't take root with most of our population.
Of course.
So I think we have the answers to these problems.
Right.
These answers have to be amplified.
Right.
They have to be delivered to people in a way that they consume them. That has to happen at scale.
Right.
I think the good part is that if you go to any other country, they don't have the answers.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. We're
They
all
don't have
equally
an
clueless.
amplification
Yeah.
problem.
Yeah. Yeah.
We have an amplification problem.
Right.
We have the answers. So that is this rootedness, because this lack of rootedness, which is the source of this problem that we are talking about, because people are not rooted to anything at all,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
That's why it's easy to dumb them down.
that is why it's easy to dumb them down. So if you have to go back and root them to something, we are the living culture in which that rootedness can be provided.
Right.
It can be provided for anybody. If you're super religious, you can find rootedness.
Yeah.
You're an atheist, you can still
also-
find rootedness, cultural rootedness in our culture, right?
Absolutely.
So that rootedness has to be delivered in a way that has never been possible before. And I think this has to be taken on in a
Right.
big way. The only contribution where techies like us can think of is to make sure that Indian AI, using responsible AI, is available for people to be able to do that. It is
Right.
people like you who
Yeah.
are, fostering these conversations, creating content. You will be the ones who will make it happen.
No,
right?
absolutely.
The rest of the stuff is merely going to be an enabler.
No, I fully agree with that. And all those things make me optimistic as well. But just one last thing before we start to wrap it up about cultural resurgence, right? I also do believe that our culture has a lot of the answers. A cultural resurgence will anchor us, against this dumbing down storm we're up against. My question is this. So I'm not sure if you saw it. I think it was, I'll put up the infographic when the episode's out, but I think it was the initial stages of ChatGPT where someone it just went viral on social media. Someone challenged ChatGPT, hey, crack a joke about African American people, crack a joke about Hispanic people, crack a joke about Indian people, right? In the first two cases, Again, I apologize if it wasn't ChatGPT. I'll get the exact one on the infographic. But whatever the AI was, for those first two instances, it responded with, "Hey, listen, I can't make insensitive comments to offend people. That's not the purpose of it, right?" In the third case, when it was like, "Hey, tell me a joke about Indian people," it turned into prime Jerry Seinfeld and started dishing out all the jokes, right? That again was, I think, one of the, and now I'm sure they fixed it after a hue and cry. But like this, there are many cases where there's kind of a double standard when we speak about cultural resurgence, where, okay, I won't dare, even in my wildest nightmares, to say something about XYZ community, but I'll kind of have a go at
Right.
Indians,
Right.
right?
No, no. So look, regulation of AI will not solve this problem.
Right. No,
It is
100%.
regulation for AI. I'll explain.
Yeah.
See, the difference between the old world and the new world, post pre and post AI, is that if you take a child and don't worry about anything, it's in a, let's say, a joint family system, you can be sure the child will start speaking,
Yeah.
right? And but if you immerse the child with walls of writing, the child will not learn how to read or write.
Yeah. Yeah.
Right? There are some things that we learn immersively, and some things have to be taught to us.
Right.
Right? So, for example, if there were we both of us, went every day in the morning to watch two grandmasters play chess, and we did that diligently for 6 months, we are not going to
We're not going to
become
become Magnus Carlsen
we are
level.
not going to
Yeah.
become chess
Yeah.
grandmasters. But if we have an AI system doing the same thing every day in the
It'll pick
morning,
it up. Yeah.
it will pick it up.
Right.
Right? So, what AI is doing is helping represent tacit knowledge, which it is able to extract in a way that has never been possible before.
Right.
Right? And therefore the question is, which tacit knowledge are you going to train it on?
True.
If you don't have an Indian AI model building ecosystem,
Yeah.
which is relying on Indian tacit knowledge to train,
Yeah.
then obviously what you're going to get is the situation that you described. Then you may regulate it. I mean, regulation may
Yeah.
happen with the government, or it may happen from OpenAI, and they'll say we'll not, we'll do
Yeah.
this.
But
But
that's not the
that'll all
solution.
there'll be an
Yeah.
unending battle. That's not the permanent solution to this problem.
Right.
The permanent solution is we are a land
Yeah.
rich in knowledge.
Yeah.
Some of it codified and some of it is not codified.
Right.
We have to find a way to build our own AI economy,
Which can reflect our values,
which can
our beliefs
reflect
and
that
stuff.
knowledge
I agree.
and give it and make it, make everybody to be able to absorb it and use it in a way that was not possible before.
Right.
So we have a cultural imperative to create
Absolutely.
an AI economy in India.
Right.
Right?
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Not of consuming the stuff from the West, but creating the stuff that we need. And
For consumption.
for
fabulous.
consumption locally. And that requires new thinking. That's another 1 hour podcast by itself. If you invite me back, we'll do that.
Yeah,
but,
for
but that's what has to happen. So I think, just to summarize, right?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've come a long way, but there are some imperatives in front of us. The imperative that we should all focus on is the imperative circle of five.
Yeah.
There'll be only 5 countries, if at all that, right, who will have the capacity to build AI models on their own, right?
Right.
Today, there are essentially 2, US and China.
That's it. Yeah.
Will we be the third?
Right.
And maybe there'll be the 4th and the 5th. We have no problem, there are
Sharing
more
in
come in.
that,
But
yeah.
we have to at least
And be
become
in that
one of
elite
the
circle, yeah.
become one of the circle of 5. Luckily, we have to do that for telecom. We have to do that for health. If we have to keep our population healthy, there is a new way of keeping population healthy. You know what that is?
What is it?
It's called cell biology, right? Synthetic biology, computational biology. What does it say? It says body has the ability to heal itself.
Yeah.
So instead of giving a cancer patient chemotherapy,
Oh, it's all cellular voltage and stuff, right?
take his
Yeah,
cells
yeah,
out
yeah,
and
yeah.
let his body solve his own cancer.
Absolutely.
Right?
Yeah.
And aiding in that process is a microbiome.
Yeah.
Who has the biggest tacit knowledge about how to control your own biome. It's called Ayurveda.
Yeah,
right?
for
So the
sure.
point is, if we can synthesize this new era of treating people
Yeah.
and become a creator of these health resources in the circle of 5,
Yeah.
then we will be able
There's
to
no
keep
stopping us.
Then there is no stopping us.
Right.
If we have to do that in defense because of China.
Yeah.
In fact, I think China is the best thing that has happened to us.
Really? Because it's kind of incentivized us to level up. Is that safe to say?
Why do you think Israel does well?
Yeah, because of the
It has
pressure
no
around it.
option.
Yeah, yeah, for sure, for sure. When you're
Why did
surrounded by hostile
why did Taiwan do well?
countries. Yeah,
If it didn't, it would have
yeah,
no chance to stand up
I
to China.
agree.
Now with China breathing down our neck,
Yeah,
it
you're
is going
forced
to
to. Yeah,
force us
I
because
agree.
they will be in the circle of five. No,
Right.
let's Australian. There's an Australian in March. You may have been aware of, and you can include it in your description. There's a critical technology analysis that came of 44 technologies. Of 44 technologies, China is ahead in 37 of them.
No way. Wow.
Right now, luckily they don't mention.
Solar and AI, they completely run
Yeah,
it,
yeah.
right?
So
Yeah.
so so they luckily they don't mention only one, but they mention the top five. India is in 19 of the 44,
In
in
the
the
top
top
five.
five,
Wow. Okay.
right? Of that, eight are because of high spirits work.
Wow. Shout out High
Another
Spirit. Yeah.
eight is as a result of national chemical laboratories, which is we have lot of power in there with the best run lab. You may have heard of Ramesh Mashelkar, who was the head of National Chemical Laboratories, went on to become CSIR head. So we have lot of areas like that, and then there are other areas like space and so on and so forth. So the question is, but that's not good enough, because we have to improve that as we go forward. And what will motivate us to improve that? Because we our focus has to shift from Pakistan
Absolutely. Yeah.
to now be better than
Right. I
China.
know.
And that is going to be the galvanizing function
Right.
for the next 30 years.
Absolutely.
And that is where everybody who is in your age group should think about how can they be part of this new India
Right.
that is going to go down this path, and what kind of a thing, what should they do,
Yeah.
and how should they be the best version of
Wow.
themselves. Hmm.
Right before, just a couple more questions. I want to touch on something which Mr. Sharad said. I think it's really, really important about how Ayurveda and such practices can actually potentially cure cancer. I'm not gonna claim to be a huge oncologist, but I'll get to the facts. They do say that majority of cancer patients tend to have what they call a low cellular voltage. In yoga, meditation, any sort of Indic practice, they'll tell you that this mudra is done this way because we have like electrical signals at our joints, and it's just something to consider about the power of breathing, the power of, and it's all related to how cortisol is less likely to be secreted, all of which has bodily impact. So why do you think mindfulness and Ayurveda are becoming multi-billion industries? Like, there is just some food for thought there. While all that's true, I want to, again, not to constantly play devil's advocate, while I too am optimistic about mindfulness and yoga and the powers of healing and looking inward and spirituality, I think all that we will win. I think there's too much in the pudding for people not to consider the facts. My question to you is this: uh, even though we might enter a new era of learning and interactive education in the future, the traditional school college system is still king when it comes to academic dissemination of knowledge in India, right? And maybe in large parts of the world. Does the current academic setup by way of higher education, right, is it safe to say that promoting Indic pride and galvanizing a cultural resurgence is not on, again, 51%, not to generalize this whole academic fraternity, but it's not high on their list of priorities? Is that safe to say?
Yes, absolutely. I think we failed
Yeah.
with pedagogy reform,
Right.
and curriculum reform.
Right.
And I think if you have to look back and total up things over the last 10 years, we could say we've done DPI well, but we failed in education. I think in its circle of five, at least in telecom, in a few areas, we've at least made a start. So I think I'm glad you bring this up. It's an area that needs attention, and we have, because we have to begin to recognize that this tacit knowledge that we hold as a unbroken civilization, the oldest unbroken civilization,
Ever. Yeah.
is more valuable
Right.
than we ourselves appreciate, right? And in this new world, see, what is going to happen is, I think AI is going to force us to redefine what does it mean to be human,
Yeah.
right? I mean,
Yeah, that's fair. That's fair.
that's not a controversial statement.
No, it's not.
And as you do that, you will have to lean on this tacit knowledge,
Yeah.
because that purpose of being human is not going to be about transactional stuff.
Right.
It
Yeah.
is not even going to be about outbound stuff.
Right.
It is going to be about the deeper stuff that our culture holds
Right.
and values. So I think India should have an aspiration to define, just the way the European, starting from Florence with art renaissance, going to Germany for 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 religious reformation,
Right.
then going to UK for science,
Yeah.
and then industrial, and then along the way they became the definers of what the world of the future should look like.
Yeah.
That allowed them to be colonizers of the world.
Exactly. Yeah.
Now India has no colonizing
Of course. Of course.
objective. It's
Agenda.
not in our
Yeah.
DNA at all. But I think it is a legitimate goal to have, that
Right.
the new definition of human society that has to emerge should emerge from India,
No.
because
Absolutely.
we have the best thinking process around
Absolutely.
it. We have to coalesce our thinking around it. Then we have to use methods to amplify it, so that we are able to give it to our own people, but also give it to the rest of the world, not for colonization,
Yeah.
but for the goodwill of the world.
No, absolutely. Just two more questions and we'll wrap up what's been an enthralling episode. I'll be linking iSpirit and Sharad, do you have your Twitter or something you want to share as well? Yeah,
Sharad is my
all
Twitter
that'll
handle.
be linked in the bio. But just two more questions before we wrap up. So one is on the top, one last thing about AI. So there's a school of thought which suggests that the next step on this evolutionary chain is gonna be, or if not the next step, the final step is gonna be machine, where we straight up become machines, right? And I've always been of the belief that if that is true, what we're currently seeing with social media addiction and people just being hooked on tech 24/7 is kind of the buffer zone between man to machine, wherein you become so, your herd mentality becomes so strong that you just say whatever is popular to get social goodwill and brownie points. You lose your sense of self, you lose your sense of critical autonomy, you lose your sense of critical thinking, all things which are so vital to the human experience, right? And you become robot like and machine like, where you parrot, what's trending, you just say things for validation and likes. And essentially, that's going to be the buffer zone we find ourselves with the next generation of people, right? Is that a concern at all that were, and it could be a lot of things, right? It could be fear of getting shamed, fear of getting cancelled for saying something, fear of, just arguments, confrontation, and number of reasons could inform this. But do you think that's a legitimate fear wherein people are, forget man to machine, on the way we're actually going to become machine like, because we're going to lose our sense of self, critical thinking, and autonomy along the way?
We could. I don't think we would.
Okay.
Let me explain why. See, this conception of a human being, there have been two conceptions all along. There has been the traditional economist conception, which is that of a utilitarian model of this. But this utilitarian model doesn't explain many things. And therefore, even in economics, one of the most prominent new fields is behavioral economics, because they realize this conception of a human that we have is not actually correct. We have to think of that person differently. Right? But this utilitarian model, which is really about individuals as cogs, as robots, there is then a whole economic model surrounding it, and that perhaps has been the globalization model, which suppresses or dismisses, the cultural context within which human operate. Right. So this has been there, and I would say, the World Economic Forum globalization is a manifestation of that thinking,
100%,
right?
100%.
But that is in retreat now.
Yeah.
Now, the alternate model is to see a human being in the context of the social fabric, the cultural fabric within which that operates. Right? It is. If you see the Indian view, there is even a more extreme view. One view is that that everybody has a soul, right? The Indian view is that a soul is the actual material.
It's the essence of being,
and the rest is merely a manifestation, right? As you go forward. So there are these competing views. I think AI has the power to amplify both, because AI is a arms merchant.
True. To the highest bidder, it goes.
It will be used by both sides to advance their views, right? And so so the question is, can India,
Yeah.
if it believes in this alternate view, use AI effectively to advance its view? I think the tussle will remain,
Yeah.
and think
We just have to come
eventually
out on top. Yeah.
the question is, that needs effort,
Yeah.
it is not it's not going to happen automatically, and but it is a worthy cause, and I think that is a cause that people are willing to embrace,
Right.
and that is a cause, if we take, then that will win. Why will it win? Because this kind of thinking is what has allowed us
Yeah.
to be the unbroken civilization we are.
Right.
I don't think it's an accident. It
No, no,
is
it's not
yeah.
coincidental. Yeah.
So if it is not an accident, then it's a result of something, that gave us an advantage to be able to
Absolutely.
compete with these competing
Yeah.
ideas that came, but were able to find a footing, but not be able to overwhelm it, right?
Right.
And
Absolutely.
and that, I think, gives me confidence that this is, if we can now use AI to
Yeah.
embrace this, as would the other side, the
Yeah.
battle continues,
Right.
except the weapons have changed.
No, absolutely. And one last question to
Right.
wrap up this episode is, if you could tell like I said, third of my listenership is based in India. We call them the thinking adults, thinking humans. Yeah. If you could kind of give one piece of advice,
Huh.
right, to someone who's Indian and tuning in for
Huh.
this, on, okay, like how to equip yourself going forward
Huh.
for this cultural resurgence and battle we're going to find ourselves in, A, and B, what is rather the reason you're so confident? You keep saying the term unbroken civilization, right? The Egyptians at one point were unbroken, the Greeks at one point were unbroken, the Romans at one point were unbroken, all legendary civilizations as well. Now they're all a thing of the past, right? Like, no one in Greece or Egypt actually prays to any of those gods, follows any of those customs. They're just some version of Islam and Catholicism. So how are you so confident that we won't end up like the Greeks or the Egyptians, who were once unbroken legendary civilizations? And first and foremost, what's a message you have to a young Indian who may be tuning in?
I love a book. It's
Okay.
called The Sports Gene. It
Okay.
poses a question. It says, in the last 30 years, 40 years, if you look at it, in almost any form of sport, especially individual sports, there's been extraordinary improvement in performance, right? I mean,
Yeah.
you can say athletics is like that. Much of endurance sports is like that.
Yeah.
Cycling, you take anything.
It applies. Yeah.
Humans are doing things that were considered
Impossible.
impossible, right?
Yeah.
Now, is it because evolution has happened, right?
Yeah.
Answer is no.
Yeah.
So he then outlines and explains in that book three things that are very important. And I think I'll relate those three things to what your question is. First, he says that, look, every sports has a body type,
Yeah.
right? So if you want to play,
Endomorph, exomorph, all
and
that.
yeah, if you want to play, basketball, you better be tall, right?
Yeah.
That's an advantage. But if you want to be a swimmer, again, it helps being tall, but tall in a different way than the basketball tall, because your
Right.
torso should be long rather than, hands being long,
Right.
right? And limbs being long. And so what has happened, he's able to show empirically with data that just by knowledge that is there is a better fit between body type and the sports that people play,
Wow.
right?
Yeah.
And therefore, by having this better fit, there is a raising of performance, right?
Right.
I'll come back to this concept a little later. Second, he says, of course, training has improved, right? And you
Nutrition, all
can
that stuff.
nutrition
Yeah.
and all of that. But the third one is that mindset has changed. Earlier, we thought the body is fragile. If I run, beyond this point, my body will just collapse,
Right.
right? Then Winhoff comes and climbs the Everest without
Yeah.
without any oxygen,
Yeah.
and so this mindset about the body has changed itself. So these three things are important. Now we are in an era, just like sports. If you want to be the best version of yourself, you should better pick the sport that fits your body type.
Right.
You better have a good teacher,
Yeah.
right? And you should have the right mindset.
Yeah.
We are now in an era where every human being has to embrace these principles.
Right.
The difference is that if you want, there has to be a match between yourself and what you plan to do.
Right.
So, sometimes because of India stack, we say there's a human stack, right? The human stack is that, for example, can you change your height?
No, you can't.
Can you change your weight?
Yeah, you
You can.
can.
So of course, so in this spectrum of things that you can't change and things you can change your weight. Can you change your emotion? You can listen to music, you can have somebody hug you, your emotions will change.
Yeah.
Can you change your fears? Harder to change, but they're changeable,
Yeah.
right? Can you change your beliefs?
Yeah.
Somebody who's on one side of the political aisle often, sometimes,
Yeah.
not
They will
often,
cross the aisle. Yeah.
will cross the aisle.
Yeah.
It doesn't happen very often, but it's
Yeah.
possible. So the unchanging part of you
Yeah.
is today called personality,
Yeah. Wow.
right? And that's called the big five personality. And
Yeah.
there are 10 traits that are unchanging.
Yeah.
If you can figure out who you are, then you can say you can match yourself to what you are doing,
Yeah.
right? So we call it that treat every human being like an orchid,
Yeah.
right? If you have lots of roses, all can be grown in one greenhouse.
Yeah.
But orchids, which are older plants,
Yeah.
they need, and you go to Himalayas, the foothills of Himalayas, India has many orchid research centers. They all have many greenhouses,
Right.
because orchids are such diverse flowers, very
Yeah.
pretty flowers. But some need arid soil, some need this, some need that.
Yeah.
So human beings are like orchids.
Right.
So they have to figure out first,
Yeah.
which requires inner work, to have self-knowledge,
Got
to
it.
know who they truly are,
Yeah.
and then find something to
Right.
do. Because it is that mix, that match, that will give you the first edge.
Absolutely.
Right? The
There's no
second-
one size fits all.
There is no one size fits all.
Yeah.
That is the thing that this generation understands intuitively.
Yeah.
Our generation didn't. You
Yeah.
become a doctor, you don't care, make yourself malleable and make it happen somehow.
Yeah.
that was the advice
mindset
that
back
was
then,
given.
yeah.
Right? That is changing now.
Right.
And the second is enroll the best teacher you can. That, I think, is going to change. We will see AI augment the best teachers.
Right.
Because that's what's going to become available in a large.
Right. Which maybe the Greeks and Egyptians didn't have back
Exactly.
then. Yeah. Okay.
And the third is we need the right mindset. Mindset is a cultural phenomenon.
Yeah.
I don't create my own mindset.
Yeah.
Mindset is a shared
conditioned,
phenomenon.
yeah.
It is conditioned.
Yeah.
And that is where we have to focus on, and that links back to your earlier conversation. So coming back to people, I would say, please focus on being the best version of yourself.
Yeah.
Please find an area where you can combine passion and purpose.
Yeah.
I'm not great in music, but I ended up, I was in Germany and in Berlin, and there was this Roger Waters event
Yeah.
that was happening. He's, I think, 78 years old.
Wow.
Right? So Pink Floyd.
Yeah,
right?
yeah, of
And
course.
So I, somebody took me to that concert, and I saw that energy. Whether you agree with his political beliefs or
different
not
debate,
is
yeah,
not
yeah,
relevant
he's a
at all.
total rock star.
Right?
Yeah, yeah,
The
of course,
point
yeah.
is
Yeah.
that he's living a life full
Yeah,
of
yeah.
passion and purpose, right?
100%,
And
yeah.
look, the only life that will be meaningful tomorrow
Yeah.
is going to be a life of passion and purpose.
Wow. So why not live it? Yeah.
Which means you must know yourself.
Yeah.
And if at all we have to know ourselves, that's the mindset we already hold, right?
Yeah.
It's not something that has to be taught to us.
It's inherent to us,
It is
yeah.
inherent to us.
Wow.
So we now need to find the right teachers. We need to find the right people who can enable us to be the best version. But let's not try to be a doctor, engineer. Just follow what has been given to
Don't
us.
follow
and
the herd, yeah.
Don't follow the herd.
Wow. Thank you so much. That should bring wraps on an amazing episode. So yeah, thank you so much. I'll be plugging iSpirit and Sharad in the link below. But yeah, any last words? Yeah.
No. I think thank you
Yeah.
so much for having me. That's really.
Cheers. Yeah.
Thanks.
Thank you so much.
Thanks.
Yeah.
Thanks.